That is going to become, just as it has done for Starmer, a massive issue from almost the day he steps in. It's all very well to commit to the 3.5% defence on spending on GDP. Excuse me as I mash my words, but funding it is another question.
Andy Burnham has done something quite remarkable in the past few weeks. He's used his local Manchester power base to lever himself into number 10 Downing Street, forcing out a serving Prime Minister and suppressing challenges from all his ambitious rivals. But his remarkable sudden rise means we know little about the way he might run the country. So, what does he think about foreign affairs and defence, for example? He's begun to answer that question this morning, writing in The Times, pledging to rebuild Britain's hard power. What does it mean? The Times political editor Stephen Swinford joins us to explain. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate.
So it's his first major intervention on defence. It's a really important moment. What exactly, though, is he promising?
So what he's promising is to have stop giving money to American companies and European companies and focus more of the defence spending in the UK. So it is about as Andy Burnham an approach and a policy as you could expect. He calls it reindustrialising Britain through defence. And that is fine, but there is bound to be, I think, an element of controversy about this because while we have significant defence expertise in this country, there are some people I've spoken to in defence circles who are saying, well, actually, the reason that a lot of kit is bought from the US and elsewhere is because it works and it has a track record, and that you may not necessarily get the best value for money if you just locate it all here, or indeed the kind of most advanced technology. The riposte to that from people around Burnham would be, it's important we develop this, and it's important that this is British jobs and we revive the economy through this. So a choice is being made here, and it's a very deliberate one, which is anchoring the increased defence spending and investment in British workers. That is his pitch to the nation.
He's also talking, Steve, about closer ties with the European Union. I wonder whether he might reopen the path for the UK to join the EU Defence Pact. Do you think that's possible?
I mean, certainly there's language around that he wants to go faster in negotiations with the EU across the board on defence and security, on legal migration, you name it. So it feels like that is a possibility, something he wants. The problem is, Kate, he might want it. There is no guarantee he would get that given the reluctance of Europe to engage with it. I mean, when you stand back from it, the actual defence policy is broadly consistent with that of Keir Starmer. So it is a continuity approach. It is backing Ukraine to the hilt. There is a commitment for the first time to spending 3.5% of GDP on defence by 2035, which we've talked about on this show before, about how challenging that is and the huge amount. It's equivalent to a 3p rise in income tax. So, that is a big commitment that's in there. So what is particularly interesting, I guess, is the emphasis. But look, we are at a stage today where we are in this slightly strange leadership contest where there is only one contender. It's almost like the Clacton by-election, which also has Count Bimface as well. But Burnham is going to run unopposed for Labour leader. There is very little we know about his broader policy agenda. This is the first insight we've had on the foreign policy, and there is definitely that 3.5%, which is significant. But we don't know very much about what he wants to do, even now at this point in time, less than a fortnight before he enters number 10.
And do we know, will there be more money? Because it does sound like if he's talking about that 3.5% commitment, that there will have to be, and it's not currently in the Defence Investment Plan. Is he committing to more?
Well, what the Defence Investment Plan has is a very broad commitment to 3.5%, but what the government has refused to do is set out the path to that at this stage. They keep saying, Manana, we'll do that in a spending review, we'll do that at some point in the future. So he is not setting out how he would hit the 3.5% yet, but that is going to become, just as it has done for Starmer, a massive issue from almost the day he steps in. It's all very well to commit to the 3.5% defence on spending on GDP. Excuse me as I mash my words, but funding it is another question, and that is going to be the big challenge. So a lot of the challenges that Starmer faces, he is going to face. That there is essentially an unfunded and uncosted defence investment plan here, and he's going to need to find the money for it.
Yeah, and he'll also have to find the money for the result of the Stephen Timms review into benefits, which we've been talking about this morning. Steve, before you go, Andy Burnham's also sent a long message to his colleagues about how he intends to govern. He's talking about the Whip's office becoming more about, I suppose, the mental health of colleagues and a much more collegiate approach to policy making. How realistic is what he's setting out, do you think?
I think at this stage it's good vibes, and it will go down well with the PLP, which is what he needs. He needs the support of Labour MPs to become the Prime Minister. But in practical reality, To govern is to choose, and some of those choices involve trade-offs, they're controversial, and there will be opposition. So he will still face the fundamental problem of how do you force through unpopular decisions, let's say on benefits, on wars, whatever it's going to be, tax rises. You're going to have rebels. Like the Labour's MPs are differing tribes, differing groups, and he's all powerful now. Everyone is behind Andy Burnham, but by the time he gets into number 10, that will probably start to change almost immediately, and those different groupings will start to have different concerns. And it needs power, needs discipline, and it will need to wield that. So I'm not sure. Let's see how it survives contact with reality.
Steve, thank you very much. Great to have you with us. That is the Times political editor, Stephen Swinford there.
And you can have a read of Andy Burnham's piece in the Times today. For people who are expecting this English graduate from Cambridge to have a literary style, I would say the literary style he's gone for is anodyne political speech. But maybe that's what you need to do when you're trying to establish your policies.
I think he's explaining what he's going to do step by step. I think he thinks that's the most important thing to do right now.
Yeah, I just want someone to be stylish for once in my adult life.
Well, he's got a £700 jacket. That's stylish.
That's not style.
Let's check in on the politics of the morning, particularly in Westminster. And here to do that with us is Ali Raza Manji, who's Times Radio's political reporter. Ali Raza, good morning.
Good morning, Tom.
Let's start front page of the Times. Andy Burnham, I'll aim defence spending at British firms, saying he's going to level with the public on the money required to meet the UK's promises under NATO. What does levelling with the public actually mean, do you think? Everyone says that they're going to level with the public, but I'm always slightly sceptical about whether they can actually follow through and tell people, yes, we're going to have to raise your taxes.
Well, precisely, and I think this is the point. Andy Burnham goes quite far here in sort of giving a sense of what his foreign policy will be like. And I think he's talking about Britain's resilience when it comes to taking up international challenges. He says that as a nation, we need to go much further. And he says that we can respond by building a Britain that is more resilient, confident and principled, resilient to the shocks that will come our way, confident in its international leadership, and principled in the abiding threats that define us as a nation. He's talking about our commitment to NATO as absolute. He's talking about our relationship with the US as critical. Of course, that's a very important relationship when it comes to our defence and security. Rebuilding our hard power. And he does actually say that the defence investment plan has to go much further in the sense that he's pointing to the fact that it has to reach 3.5%, which is the NATO target set. Currently, we're sitting at around 2.56%.
Yes, he says as part of it that he wants to invest more of that money in the UK, support British jobs, British workers, boost industry essentially with a defence industry. One of the challenges with defence spending is that MOD procurement is not always the best. One of the risks of that strategy surely is that you narrow the market from which you procure new systems and new equipment.
Well, precisely. And I think part of the issue is that there has been a reliance on America for British technology for a long time. It's going to be difficult to change that within 2 years, let alone in a 5-year term. That is essentially a change in the way we do our defence. Of course, it's quite well known that France had its own nuclear deterrent. And if we're talking in Britain about changing our way we do it, then we clearly have to think about that. And it will take a long time to get to that point where essentially our industries for defence are running on their own. Now, he does say that it's critical for our economic and national security that we do sort of get a grip on this. And he is mostly focusing, I think, at this point on AI, which is where the UK does have a burgeoning sector, especially in AI military defence. And that is an area maybe we can grip a lot easier than maybe the traditional industries of war. But all the same, he is pointing to the UK essentially focusing on its own defence without as much influence from foreign countries.
Mike gets in touch. Good morning, Mike. Andy Burnham will need to maintain the confidence of the PLP, i.e. Labour backbenchers. On tough decisions like welfare reform, he needs to make a positive case for the change, unlike Sir Keir Starmer, who, rightly or wrongly, let it appear like an exercise in cutting spending. And Lisa, good morning, Lisa. I think politicians underestimate the public's capacity for hearing the truth. They may not like what they're hearing and may feel dismayed to learn that hard choices need to be taken, but the reason trust has been lost is that politicians do not step up and have frank and honest conversations with voters. Tell people the truth and be honest about how you'll fix things, and tell us that nothing will change overnight. Well, maybe that might win your vote, Lisa. Will it win enough votes to keep people in power? Do we have the patience as a public? We'll see how Andy Burnham handles those communications challenges, I suppose. Obviously, Ali Raza, lots of stories this week about Nigel Farage and Reform UK, the gifts he or the party have received. Times also on the front page, the fact that Nigel Farage, it says, faces new questions over the timing of Christopher Harborne's donation. So this is because people around him, Tony Mack, a Reform candidate he replaced in Clacton in 2024, he says that he knew about 6 months before the election that Nigel Farage was considering a return to frontline politics, considering standing in Clacton. So that's sort of early 2024. April 2024, that's when Christopher Harborne gives his £5 million gift. Nigel Farage says that is a personal gift, it's for his security. And then obviously the election comes a few months later. And I suppose that timeline of events adds to these questions about, well, where is the line for someone like Nigel Farage between what is your personal life and your personal finances and what is geared towards a return to public life?
And this goes to the heart of the question that Nigel Farage is facing, of course. I mean, the big issue, I think, is obviously, as you say, the timeline of when this gift was given. And it was given between that 12-month period before he had to start making declarations. Now, essentially, Nigel Farage has maintained that this was a personal gift and he can use it in any capacity he wants. Indeed, he did tell a different interviewer that he could use it for Ferraris. I'm not sure how that went down well with the public. But my point being is that he's always maintained that this is his personal choice and that basically this is an establishment stitch-up in trying to get him to change the rules. Now, that's why he has called this by-election. That's why on the 6th of August, the voters in Clacton will have to decide between him and a bin because all of the other parties have chosen not to take part.
Yes. We should also reflect on front page of the Eye. Scotland Yard, the Metropolitan Police, investigating a political donation made to Robert Jenrick's campaign to become Conservative leader when he stood against Kemi Badenoch in 2024. £37,500. Just talk us through this one.
Yeah, this is a bit of an interesting donation because £37,500 were given to Robert Jenrick for his leadership campaign. But it was part of a wider donation of £100,000 given by Philip Ullman, a British sort of entrepreneur. Now, what's interesting about this £37,500 is that it came from a foreign source. Now, foreign sources are banned to interfere in British elections, and we're not expected to take those donations on. It came from someone called Gary Kelpenfright, who basically has been convicted of fraud and was a partner of Mr. Ullman. Now, in that sense, it's not quite so sure, and the Met Police are investigating. They have said that we have launched an investigation after the referral from the Electoral Commission into a party leadership campaign. The investigation is ongoing, so we don't quite know where the investigation has reached. But Robert Jenrick, for his part, has said he has denied it clearly. And he said this is another stitch up. He says this is the establishment trying to prevent reform making the change the country needs. But this donation goes to the heart of the issue. It looks like there are many people within reform who have taken on donations, not just Philip, not just what we've read in the Sunday Times, obviously, over the weekend, and this £5 million donation, and not to mention this donation to Robert Jenrick before he became a reform person, it's worth saying. But it does go to the heart of the issue that maybe that the level of scrutiny that reform is now under is much more significant, and the members of reform are struggling to explain certainly why these donations are happening, and they're certainly willing to give a sort of a rationale for it.
Yes, Robert Jenrick says the police haven't contacted him as part of this investigation. And as Ali Raza says, we should make clear this was from when Robert Jenrick was a Conservative MP before he defected to Reform UK. Ali Raza, thank you so much for your time this morning.